This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we give you our video version of the Autopsy report. And I think it's fitting, right? Like, you like to see the people who actually give you the diagnosis and the prognosis of the team, of the people who are responsible for discussing how to body bag another team that bites the dust. And so this is our playoff edition in conversing about teams that have obviously been eliminated. It's our playoff version, our playoff edition of the Autopsy reports. And so let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my partner in crime, Mr. Warren Shaw. I think people are really liking the fact that they can put a face to the voices of our show.
I hope so. I mean, for us, we definitely like to keep things different when we do the baseline, and this is a great opportunity now to switch to some different formats, give people a little bit of our personalities on camera as well too, and especially with this autopsy, I think it's a little bit more emotional for some than others. This team definitely you feel some type of way about them one way or the other. So excited to get right to it, brother.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of curious. What kind of way did you feel about the Philadelphia 76ers?
I think, like everybody, a lot of people, disappointed, and how they acquitted themselves in the playoffs against Boston, and getting swept is never the way to go out. They had a little bit more fight maybe in the last two games, but ultimately, they fell extremely short. And while I didn't think they could win without Ben Simmons to begin with, I think just in general, you feel a level of disappointment, and there's already some windfall that's come as a result of them losing in the fashion that they lost as well too. Players speaking out, and I don't know, man. It's a tough situation in Philly, and the book on where everyone thinks they should go is very, very different, from blowing it up to minor tweaks to management. So we got to dig into it, man. It's a lot to discuss.
Yeah, so I mean, there's clearly a lot of storylines to get into. But as always, when we do our discussions in regards to the autopsy report, we try to basically bring everything down to ground zero. Like what is really the next steps for us to have different expectations for this team. And I think that also the important question is where do they go from here? And so we're going to try and see if we can dig into a little bit of those things, before we have to zip up the body bag and put them in the slab and, wait to see what kicks up out of the dirt for this team come the offseason. So once again, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us as we give you our playoff edition of the Autopsy report. And, the team that we will be talking about is the Philadelphia 76ers. But we got to do our plugs. So as always, be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFaceLee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. But now that you kind of see us on video, I'm sure if you guys realize the Baseline is available on Instagram as well, too. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. But as always, like any Audible show, we do drop the podcast. And so if you're down for the podcast, be sure to look for the Baseline NBA podcast on all available major platforms. And for our online radio listeners, you can listen to the Baseline. We happen to drop our logic, our science on a weekly show every Tuesday, and then we recap it again on that Wednesday. So we are available. We are all over the place, baby. You know where to look for us. You know where to find us, right? So let's not waste any time. You know how we do. You know how we roll. Let's do a little autopsy, playoff style, discussing the 76ers here on The Breakdown. Time now for the autopsy report, and our topic will be the Philadelphia 76ers, a team that was dispensed rather quickly by the Boston Celtics in the first round of the 2020 NBA playoffs. A team that, when they returned to the NBA bubble to commence, the game, the seedings for before the playoffs, I found something to be very interesting about this team, Shaw. I think that, you may have believed in some ways that the time off would probably help this team really kind of sort out a lot of the issues that I think have been lingering, leading up to before the suspension of the season due to the pandemic. And I think Kenny Smith on who is one of the color commentators for the award-winning team that covers the NBA on TNT, he brought up a very interesting point. He's like, some players, when you see them have a 3-month layoff and they are now in this setting, they become a different person. You no longer look at that player in the same way of after the previous season, they have this whole offseason to kind of figure out what you're seeing. They were given 3 months and they suddenly are showing you a different version of themselves, an advanced version of themselves. So we're seeing it with Luka Doncic, right? We're seeing it with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at times. We're seeing it with Donovan Mitchell. Like guys that we think come next season would start to show the form of being an MVP-like type of player. They were given that 3 months time and they somehow leapfrogged themselves and are now showing you what they're capable of being, what we expected them a month, going into next season. And somehow the bigger storyline for me, while everything is going to be about some of these other stuff that we're talking about with the Sixers, the bigger storyline is what I didn't see from Joel Embiid. While as impressive as he was as a big, there was nothing about his numbers and nothing about his presence that made me feel like that 3 months that they took off, he came in with this mentality that whether he had Ben Simmons or didn't have Ben Simmons, he wanted to prove that he was the best player in the bubble. And I just didn't see that, not through just the 8 games they played for the seeding, but even in those 4 games in which they got ousted by the Boston Celtics.
I think that's fair. Joel did not dominate. I think he had stretches and peaks and valleys throughout the course of that 4-game sweep. For sure, I think they put out the infographic, in the first quarters or even in the first half, 19 and 10 or something like that, and then the second half, 6 and 3 or something. Like I said, I don't have the exact statistics in front of me, but in general, he fell off a cliff in those second halves, and a lot of that is fatigue. He still's got to work on his conditioning. And Boston had a very good game plan as well too. Can I throw
out a conspiracy theory? Do you think maybe he came out to show face that he is, he could easily be the best player, but then he basically gives you these subpar performances in the second half, in essence, to solidify Brett Brown's exodus as the head coach, because maybe he didn't buy too much into him helping the process?
No, I think that's a very slippery slope, to go down.
Does that have a quote unquote QAnon feel to what I'm saying? Let me pull myself back. I should not be messing with that nonsense, because that's some dangerous and crazy conspiracy stuff that be going on there, or whatever the case may be. So I'm going to apologize on that, because as much as I do like to play on words and things of that nature, that was a slip on my part. Let me find some other crazy other conspiracist theorems that doesn't teeter on the destruction of the planet to, to kind of equate what I was thinking regarding Joel Embiid's nonsense of a performance in this first round. So
I'm gonna take a left there and go back. And I think with Joel, just in general, he's this person that, he fell victim to Boston's game plan, especially when they tried to double him. They were expert at hedging their double. So where he really couldn't make a decision whether he was going to just make a quick move or if he really needed to pass out of that double team and find somebody out on the outside, especially guys like Marcus Smart, because they're just so good at kind of hedging and then recovering back to their man. And he just wasn't able to read that. And that's just that next level of basketball intellect that he's got to continue to develop if he's going to become the most dominant big man. And he acknowledges it on one hand that he's lacking skills and that he needs to do certain things. But then he says he consistently gives himself the way out. And I'm not going to say he's wrong, but it is interesting to me because he'll say, well, I know guys like Kenny and Shaq, they want me to be down there in the post and blah, 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 blah. But that's not what this game is here in 2020. Big men need to be able to shoot and create. And he's not wrong. right? But I think he falls in love with getting on the perimeter, especially when he gets fatigued and then he doesn't want to go down there. And then his play, not him, but his play can become very sloppy and unattractive to watch because when he's tired, he just doesn't do the right things.
Yeah. Well, let me say this. If Joel Embiid has to emphasize points that are made by Shaq, Barkley, Smith, in order to validate what he what he is laying out or defining to us as his game, he's got an even bigger problem, right? Like, so there's some players that I believe have the cachet, right? They've earned the ability that if they're going to tout worrying about what other analysts and commentators are saying about their game, that they feel the need to address it, they should address it. And there's really only a handful of players that I think should be in that conversation. LeBron James, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and now you can even say Giannis Antetokounmpo, right? Because he has significantly done things, not just for his team, but in the NBA that has allowed him to be in that criteria. Like, he can meet that criteria. While Joel Embiid is a phenomenal player and is a part of the controversial process, he doesn't have a role. He doesn't have a place at that table. He doesn't have a seat at that table just yet. He's being coined as, well, the next Akeem Olajuwon. But where exactly is it in his game so far in his career that has translated to why we would even dub him in that or put him in that same realm, right? And part of that is the reason why we give Hakeem Olajuwon and Shaquille O'Neal, those guys, their props is because they didn't need to wait for the commentators to tell them what they needed to do in order to be better or to dominate at their position. They went and they just did it. They got with whoever they needed to get with. They played against whoever they needed to play against in the offseason, and they just did it. And I know that this is all about the Philadelphia 76ers as an autopsy, but you can make the argument that Joel Embiid is slowly but surely on a fast track to minimize himself as being a legit cornerstone player, thus creating an autopsy for him and himself. Like, the Philadelphia 76ers are in one cemetery, and you can go bury Joel Embiid in his career in a whole other different lot.
His
outside
career?
Of the cemetery.
God dang.
Well, no, because what I'm saying is that he has those expectations as being that type of player because of the controversy. And we talked about this. It's not just the fact that he is who he is. He's a part of that controversy, that air that's out there. It's because of the process that we're not giving him that timeline, right? I'm not going to give him that timeline because he was foolish enough to play up the fact that he was a part of the process. It's kind of like in politics. You want to keep running around with the people that don't believe in what you believe, but you think that by riding with these people, they'll get you to where you go. Then when they do something, to your point, way right, way left, out of your area, you have to decide on whether you want to continue to hit your wagon with that strategy, with that premise. And Embiid, for the last few years, has hitched his wagon on being the process, as part of the process. And thus doing that, you shorten your timeline to your ascension of greatness. And that's all that I'm saying. That for Embiid, and I know we got to get to other stuff on this, but with Embiid, he in his own right cut off his ascension to greatness, because this could again be part of his young, adjustment, his learning curve. But when he continues to open his mouth and he allows other little things like what he's doing right now, that now adds to the idea that, so we have automatically put you in that realm, and thus your greatness obviously affords you the ability to now be talked in the kind of way where guys like Shaq needed 3-4 years to do it. You want to be in that realm, so now we got to give it to you in those 3 or 4 years, not 5 or 6 years. Because let's remember, Embiid wasn't healthy when he came in, but we have to keep reminding him of that. He doesn't remind us of that. And then when he comes out and he basically gives you subpar performances in a playoff game against a rival, that already tells you that this is nothing to do with, okay, his injury, he's not 100%, he's out of shape. You've been given the chances. We've given you the benefit of the doubt, and yet you still haven't stepped up and at least shown us that in that series you weren't even the best player on both sides of the team, from out of both teams.
And I think with Joel though, like it is always going to be a catch-22 in the essence of, we said this even coming to the series, that he cannot create his own shot. So a lot of where the slack for Embiid comes in is like, okay, well, is he being aggressive enough? But I remember watching different points throughout the series. Doris Burke was commentating. She's like, listen, he's there posted up, and they looked him off. They didn't get him the ball. So you don't know if that's teammates, you don't know if that's scheme, coaching, or whatever the case may be, or then Embiid just being frustrated. So can he be a little bit more demonstrative? Then if he is, does that come off as, now he's not a team guy or whatever? But I remember one specific play, he had Tice sealed. They kind of looked at him, was like, never mind. They swing it to the other side. He then flashed to the strong side of the ball, but now was pushed out of the block by Tice and basically caught it at the free throw line extended. Then made a turnaround and then, whatever, like wasn't really in the same position that he was. And a lot of that, again, as a big man, you have to have people get you the basketball. And I think for him, especially without Simmons there, they struggle with that this series for sure. But could he have been more demonstrative and tried to ask for it so that he can meet the kind of maybe aggressive timeline that is in some ways mythologically put on him? It's not stated, it's not written down anywhere, but I think to your point, some of the statements and some of the ways that Philadelphia has maneuvered over in recent years makes you feel, okay, they should be a lot further along, and he personally should be a lot further along than he is. And I'm not going to dispute that, because I said he needed to be at 32 and 15, 2-3 blocks and whatever the case may be, and he was close to those numbers. But they were almost, as we say on the show, empty calories, again, or they were very front loaded, and wasn't able to really bring it home at the end. And that's a huge problem. But obviously Embiid is one thing. And again, I don't want to spend the entire show talking about him, but we have to kind of get to his standing on this team, because if you're listening and watching to NBA Twitter right now, it's madness. I'm seeing the Warriors like, oh, well, the Warriors are going to make an offer for him, and this team's going to make an offer for him. The Knicks want to make an offer. So can you get this crappy draft, package, one of your high picks with some higher contract? The Warriors right now looking at Wiggins 2 and some filler, or maybe Wiggins and next year's Minnesota unprotected pick to try to get Embiid over there. I don't know if that's a real rumor from the Golden State side, but it's things that people are throwing out there in general. And I just don't see that happening with Philadelphia, because the biggest thing has already happened. They fired Brett Brown the very next day, like Black Sunday in the NFL. He was gone. You don't even know if he got a chance to ride on the plane back with them.
He was gone. He was gone before. That was just the official release, right? That's just official documentation and press release about him being gone. He was gone the moment that they put the microphones in front of the team. Okay, that and again, this is part and parcel with a team that clearly did not spend enough time addressing the issues that plague the talent of the Philadelphia 76ers. And maybe you can blame that on Brett Brown. maybe that where he had an opportunity to salvage and save his job as a head coach for the Philadelphia 76ers. The most pressing element is not assuming that you're dealing with men. That in essence, you kind of are dealing with boys, right? They have goatees and mustaches and have facial hair in all of the parts of their body, but up in their head, their mentality, the way that they're approaching this situation and the whole thing that was going on, this was a unique opportunity for the Philadelphia 76ers to change the narrative of how people should perceive this team. And yes, while Ben Simmons going down was a major blow to this basketball team, did you really think that you had any confidence with the way that they played those 8 seeding games, with any confidence that they were going to come out of the Eastern Conference? I sure as hell didn't see that, No. And to me, that was the statement. There's certain things that you should be doing in the essence of the bubble. Josh Richardson, for example, he certainly didn't prove to me that the Miami Heat made a mistake in adding him into this deal to bring in Jimmy Butler. We kind of talked about this sparingly and even off, us recording. For him to come out and say anything towards what was going on with this situation added unnecessary fuel to the drama, and in essence, kind of have now the fingers being pointed at him when he goes into this offseason. Because he was supposed to come in and bring something to the table that we didn't see consistently enough of, right? And now you have to wonder, is he just going to be another one-sided type player? The person you could put out there, roll out because he's pretty good defensively, but you can't rely on him offensively. You can't rely on him in a guard-like situation to supplement, to your point earlier about getting that ball to Joel Embiid, right? And so that again is going to put pressure on Elton Brand because it makes him look like the move that he made to do this compromised the ability for the Sixers to move up rather than stay where they are.
I want to make a quick comment. I don't want to spend a lot of time on Josh Richardson either. He definitely did not have the season that everyone expected him to have, and definitely not the playoff series that they expected. He played a good game one, but ultimately fell off. But I think some early comparisons had him being kind of like a Jimmy Butler light, right? Josh Richardson.
An insult. I thought that was somewhat of an insult. But
yeah,
okay.
I mean, it's not something that's widely publicized. Everyone's running, he's the next, whatever. Again, he's in that mold, but he's to me, he's tracking more like a Courtney Lee, a guy who is pretty good, can handle a little bit, plays good defense, can shoot the three, but doesn't have that level of consistency, and will always have a roster. And again, I'm not trying to project Josh Richardson's career. He's only 26 years old and has a lot more in front of him, so to speak. But he's more on the Courtney Lee side than he is on the Jimmy Butler side right now. And Philadelphia, they definitely need him to be more towards Jimmy. Maybe not in terms of even his locker room presence, but definitely play on the court, trying to bring it on both sides of the basketball. And I thought that might have happened, especially with Simmons out during the playoffs. I thought he could have had a very, very big series against, Boston, but he's just not there yet, and that's fine. Ultimately, though, this team, it failed in the playoffs because they weren't able to rely on their physicality, as I alluded to. It didn't really get great 3-point shooting in this, although throughout the season they were 9th, I think, in 3-point percentage, but 22nd, I believe, in actual attempts. So they got to find ways where they can get more confidence in this. Thibault is a rookie, but he didn't have a good series at all in this. And they have a lot of questions that they have to address outside of now the coaching situation and Brett Brown.
Well, I can definitely say that while Thibault had a bad playoff series, he to me was one of the bright spots for the Philadelphia 76ers. To be able to draft a guy like him, or basically get a guy like him through the draft. I hate to say this, Shaw, because you just brought up Josh Richardson. He makes Josh Richardson expendable. I see more upside from Thibault for the Sixers right now. And see, let me not make sure I'm putting this properly, because I'm not saying that Josh Richardson doesn't deserve to start, doesn't deserve to be playing. I'm just wondering, is Josh Richardson the right person for the roster that you're going to try and roll out next year for the Philadelphia 76ers? Because after seeing what Thibault gives you, I'm saying you can get that from Thibault, and Thibault deserves those minutes, right? One of the things that I did see that I felt like the reason why I'm bringing up this point is Josh Richardson did not play with near the amount of physicality that I was expecting him to be playing at his position, even from a defensive perspective. So if at the very least, if you're struggling offensively, you still should be bodying up on guys because you are the bigger guard, because you have that ability. Marcus Thibault is not bigger than Josh Richardson, yet Thibault was probably one of the most physical defenders that the Philadelphia 76ers had. I'm just saying in the comparisons. I feel like Josh Richardson may be a little bit longer, you know what I'm saying, which to me makes him a little bit bigger in comparison to the positions, the normal height of the positions that guys that play that two-guard, that off-guard position. Thibault to me played like the more physical, bigger guy. Like Brett Brown, when he had him, could move Thibault around. I don't think you could have done that with Richardson at times, which is, to me, it's weird to think that way, because one of the key assets in why he was a part of that deal and why Miami was kind of about getting rid of him is the versatility that Josh Richardson would show you from the defensive side of the ball. And we didn't even see that. So I don't know if that was more because he just wasn't vibing with Brett Brown, just wasn't buying into the system, wasn't vibing with the guys on his floor, didn't have the confidence with them. But what I'm saying is that at the end of the day, the moment you get in front of the microphone and you start talking out the side of your neck about things that really you don't either know too much about, or you haven't been versed in it long enough because you want to be a part of the team, is the moment that now a target is on your back about your ownness of what you're bringing to the table. And he didn't live up to that. And to me, that makes him somewhat of a liability. And I think there's going to be a competition. Whoever the new coach is going to be looking at that starting guard position. And that's an opening for a guy like Thibault to step in and probably take Richardson's place.
It's possible. I don't know what type of overall changes they'll do with this. I mean, for Richardson, the points per game were decent, but the field goal percentage at 36 throughout the series was pretty atrocious in general. Tybal doesn't have the same level of versatility because he can't create in the way that Richardson is supposedly be able to do. And I don't know if that's the homework that they give him, Elton Brand and company, they give him in the offseason. It's like, hey, we need to have more play creation on this team outside of Simmons, when he's back. I think when Nikias was on, we talked a little bit about what Shake Milton was supposed to be able to do, especially moving Simmons out of the point guard spot into the four. Well, Milton proved not to be a great creator, throughout the course of this series, where Richardson has the ability to maybe kind of take up some of that. It was friggin' Tobias Harris who led the team in assists, throughout the course of the series. And
I know we're gonna talk about Tobias in a moment, but okay.
Yeah. But Harris is not a playmaker. So the fact that he had to lead the team in assists throughout the series shows you how much they miss Simmons, but just how much there's not enough playmaking on the rest of this roster. And that again is another issue in addition to the overall shooting and things of the nature that needs to occur on this team. So Richardson is going to have to figure some things out. I think the team is going to figure some things out in terms of what his role ultimately can be. And then, as you alluded to, Tybal coming into year two, more of a 3-and-D type guy, but can he really expand his role, and do something more creatively off the bounce? So I think which would be, immense for them, especially if Simmons is back, then you can put all that length out there on the floor and really stop teams defensively. And remember, they were still one of the top 10 teams defensively, in their middle of the pack when it comes to offensive rating this year. So they're not that far off in terms of what's the eye test is and their overall statistics outside of their record, but their chemistry and the way they play together is something that just does not fit right now. And while you're talking about Richardson, my fingers and eyes point to Al Horford, who, again, I don't dislike him. It's been a bad fit. It's just been a bad fit. All it did was take a big away from Boston, but he didn't add anything to Philadelphia. And you're seeing rumors about him as well too. Maybe some crazy deal in Sacramento as they try to get De'Aaron Fox or whatever. And Sacramento is a whole other ball of wax that we've got to discuss on another show. But to me, Horford is the piece that doesn't fit in the way that they really wanted it to.
Absolutely. So it's interesting because we talk about the autopsy and, like in an autopsy, you want to examine the cause of death, right? Mm-hmm. Well, for both Tobias Harris and Al Horford, something could be said is, well, how can you have an autopsy when you don't have a body? Yeah, because both of those guys during various parts, not just in this restart, but even in the playoffs, they were missing for about most of the games, for most of the matchup. And then they would kind of like just suddenly appear. And they have like maybe one or two flash moments.
Horford with his customary screams and flexes, here and there. And I was like, all right, bro, like settle down. Even when he was in Boston, it's just like it just doesn't come off naturally. So when he was doing that a couple times throughout the series, it seemed really fabricated. And I'm not trying to call him a faker, but maybe he did that to try to pump the team up more than anything else, or even himself up to get himself more engaged, because it's been a slog for him this year without a doubt. And they're gonna have to figure that out. For him, his role. And the competitive way that he interacts with this team. My biggest disappointment, and this stems back to his time in Boston, is I just don't see him as the vocal leader that maybe it's me that I thought he was or was capable of. Mm. I think a lot of what happened in Boston, he was just like,
You have to question how much of an influence did he really have?
Yeah, it's like I don't really want to be involved
in those years that when we assume that he is supposed to be like the key to really have the ear of the young guys to help step up and offset
and augment. In that respect, yes, he's there. Yeah. He'll take his arm and put it around you and say, "Hey, bro, blah 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 blah." But when it comes to that locker room drama crap, he's not the one to try here and squash it and try to get everybody back on the same page. No, and Philadelphia had that this year, unfortunately, too.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing that is unfortunate as well is, and look, we can speak to the psychology of the game in some respects. Sometimes when you decide to sign with another team, especially a team that's in the same division and ultimately is a rival of you, when you choose to sign your way into that, you have to have a different mentality about how you're approaching it. You know, when Ray Allen chose to sign with the Miami Heat against the Boston Celtics, you know, in his mind, he just basically looked at it as they want me and the Celtics don't, right? What he didn't realize is that he realized he didn't recognize how he was setting off a chain of events in that fold, the unity, the unification. Hey, you came here so that we have opportunities to win championships, and then the Miami Heat became our rivals, right? Like LeBron James purposely left Cleveland to go line up with his boy, and they went and pulled the best player out of the in the 3-4 position, the 4-5 position, and Chris Bosh to come together to defeat the Boston Celtics, right? Like their goal was to take out the Celtics, and then when the opportunity presents itself that you guys could still re-up and maybe do it one more time, you choose to go with the Miami Heat. The Celtics, hey man, there's a history of them feeling some kind of way. And anytime you're wearing that jersey, that air is still out there. And that to me was one of the bigger mistakes for Al Horford is if your intention is that you want to go play for the Philadelphia 76ers, right? And in your moment to look at this and say, hey, they wanted me more than the Celtics wanted me, you better damn sure make sure that you make that investment look good, not just for the organization, but for yourself. Because
hold on.
This is a stain. It's a stain. It is a stain.
I don't think Boston wanted him more or less.
No, but if
Al wanted more.
Right, Al wanted
contract.
More. I'm not talking about the money show. I'm just simply talking about, again, the perception about how you're approaching this. And so no matter what happens, because listen, fans don't know the monies that's being exchanged all the time. They don't know the discussions. It's just the moment that you start throwing that jersey up at the press conference and it's not the jersey of the team that you originally had on the year previously that is a rival to the team that you are wearing that posing that jersey for, it's saying something, right? It's saying that clearly that is more important than what this is. Like, because people will completely no one is chastising Isaiah Thomas because Danny Ainge traded Isaiah Thomas, who helped them get to the Eastern Conference Finals, and ship him off, somewhere else or let him go or whatever the case may be. Al Horford had a choice, right? He kind of had a choice on this. Go anywhere else. But if you choose to go with the Philadelphia 76ers in the heat of a rivalry between these two teams, you better damn sure make sure that you are going to put your best effort for the 76ers, because the 76ers fans are not going to forget the Celtics fans. Celtics fans don't care about Horford. They're glad he's gone. But Sixers fans will not forgive him for that. And I think that is going to be more on Horford, because he knows he could have played better. He knows he could have contributed better. He knows he could have stepped up better. Then it starts raising those questions. What was your true intentions of coming over to this team for? And then you get exposed.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it was to secure a bag. He thought he was escaping the drama that was Boston with Kyrie and Tatum and Brown and all that whole madness or whatever, and going to a team that seemed like they were on the cusp.
So it says
something special.
He was never a part of that team. Then that's what that says. Because if you're Al Horford, and I'm saying I draw your comparisons to Kevin Garnett, you think Kevin Garnett's going to let you ruin that team? Hell no. If you're Al Horford. Right, he's not Kevin Garnett, at all. But absolutely. But Celtics fans were expecting that if you are big brother to those young guys and whoever, like everybody in Boston knew that Kyrie Irving wasn't running that team. He conceded that, unfortunately. And then the offhanded comments. So if you're Al Horford, you know that that's your team, right? And you got to figure out a way to make sure that is what's communicated. So you force Danny Ainge in that context. Again, I don't want to get into those semantics, but what I'm saying is that if you are Elton Brand now with the Philadelphia 76ers and you see Al Horford in that kind of light, do you choose to keep him on? And here's another thing. In an interesting way, I want to bring this to get your perspective on this. There's this running trend now with the 76ers and bringing veteran players to play next to Simmons and Embiid. And you have to start wondering what combination is going to work for Simmons and Embiid if you choose to keep both of those guys on your roster. You can't just bring whoever is available out there. You really do need to bring a good set of veteran guys that can deal with what these two guys obviously have an effect on for this team.
Well, the problem Philadelphia has more than anything else is everyone is throwing out stuff. Well, just blow it up and do whatever. They're cap strapped like a mug. $147 million in committed salaries right now. Who's taking on Al Horford at $80 million left on his deal? Who the F is doing that? Especially off the year he just had. So I that's what I say. I can't subscribe to the just blow it up theory because it always takes other people to want to be involved to help you, if you will, to offload contracts.
Crushing Elton Brand. Which is why everyone is crushing Elton Brand, right? Because he made those deals.
So yeah, Tobias going to be paid $33 million next year. Embiid at 29, Horford at 27, Ben Simmons at 29, Josh Richardson at 10.8, so call it 11. $147 million in cap. And they're not even bringing back a guy who I thought played well for them in Alec Burks. Like, he's off the books. So they'll go into deeper cap if they wanted to try to bring him back. They can, I think Glenn Robinson has a player option, roughly $2 million. So he'll probably opt into that, missed the rest of this season with an injury. That was a big thing that Brett Brown actually discussed as well too. But there's not a whole lot that they can do. And Elton Brand is willing to push buttons. So he's willing to trade. And he'll be on the phone, and he'll be trying to do whatever, but I don't see the massive changes coming to this roster that everybody is calling for. I just don't think they can do it, and that's why it's going to have to start, and it already has started with the coach and Brett Brown being gone. And now do you hope you can keep Simmons and Embiid healthy for next year, find an acceptable role for Horford in some aspect or capacity, develop Josh Richardson some more, Shake Milton, same thing, develop him some more, and then put this team in a place where from a chemistry standpoint, they can actually be competitive in the Eastern Conference, because it's not as simple as just, all right, trade off all these assets and all these pieces. And sure, there's interest in Embiid. Sure, there'd be even interest in Simmons if you wanted to do it. So those guys are movable, but you're not getting rid of Horford or Tobias Harris right now because no one's going to go into that.
All right, so I got two questions for you, and then we can, I guess, give our final eulogies for the 76ers here. The first question that I have as it pertains to Al Horford, since, we've been talking about him pretty extensively, do you think there's a way that the Sixers can reshape Al Horford's contributions to this team in a way that is similar to how the Raptors have been utilizing Serge Ibaka?
I think Horford is probably more Marc Gasol than he is Serge Ibaka right now. Ibaka is confident in his shot. I still don't get that I don't get that impression about Horford at any way, shape, or form, that he's confident to shoot the basketball. Ibaka's like, right here's good, and Ibaka will go in there and be physical, on that, especially on the defensive side. So I think the comparison is valid per se. I would just probably shift it a little bit more towards the Gasol side, because I think Horford's he's definitely on the down stage of his career, and the opportunities for him to come off the bench, even if that's what they decided to do, and give you 15-6, 15-7, 13-7, something like that. I don't think that's there. He's going to be more of like a 10-5, 10-4 guy right now, and I mean that sounds pretty crappy for guys going to make almost $30 million, but I just don't know that there's much more that he can give. And I think a lot of it is the things that we're hoping for in terms of the leadership and the veteran guidance that he'd be providing to this team. I don't think statistically he can be in the stratosphere of what Ibaka is doing on both sides of the basketball for them. I just don't see that in the cards for them at all.
All right,
it would be nice.
It would be nice. Okay, so now my final question for you here is in regards to Tobias Harris. I know we haven't really talked about him, and there's not a whole lot really to say. Tobias Harris has really been a mysterious, I guess, phenomenon type thing, of wonderment, like putting these words together. I struggle to understand why he cannot be consistently successful. We've seen his training regimen. We've seen, how he, articulates his dedication to the game, and how he's, I just don't get why he can't be stable in any team and system that he's played for. Maybe in my mind, I think maybe the most stable I've ever seen him was when he was really ascending, when he played for the Milwaukee Bucks, and he had some really good he had a year or two of good successful period when he played for the Orlando Magic. But I think that all that's done is just propelled him, wayward in so many ways, like with the Clippers and now with the Sixers. And he is a decent player in the sense that he offensively really can help you in certain ways. He can obviously not find himself in Brett Brown's system, and he certainly is lost in his ability to figure out what he can give you next to Simmons and Embiid. But what the hell can he give you if, obviously, to your point, his contract makes him immovable? And it's like you either need a coach that's going to figure out a way to get something out of this guy that's consistent for 4 quarters, or you have to just basically kind of shrug your shoulders on this and say, this is what you deal with a guy like Tobias Harris in the dynamic of the system with Simmons and Embiid.
Yeah, and maybe I'll fall back slightly. I don't know if his contract is immovable as maybe as some others. It is a high number. He still was 20-7 this year. Shot 80% from the free throw line. So what, 36% from three. So it's not bad. He's not a bad player. And as you alluded to, he's moved around, but that's also a sign of people wanting him. They recognize the talent that he has. So,
right.
Yeah, it's a great years in Milwaukee, or there was a couple, I guess he was drafted there, but great years in Orlando, was playing really great basketball in LA with Doc Rivers before getting traded to Philadelphia, and again, had a good season even here, with Embiid and Simmons, kind of in and out of the lineup with their various injuries. Tobias played 72 games, right? Had an awful fall in game 4. I was surprised he came back in that game, but that's another story in itself. But 20-7, 80% from the line is definitely movable, in terms of statistical aspect of things. And he's a high character guy on top of it as well too. But again, maybe not the leader that you're looking for, in the locker room. And again, he doesn't necessarily have to be. So I think with Philadelphia, they like the piece they have in him. Is he a little bit overpaid? Probably, especially if you really want Simmons and Embiid to be what they can potentially be. I don't know if a guy like Tobias Harris makes sense, especially at that number. But at the end of the day, it's done. So now you got to figure out, are you going to continue to go in that path, move one of the other 2 big stars, which I think is very highly unlikely, as I alluded to, or again, and just figure out how to make it work. And we have to put a lot of credence into what they do next from a coaching standpoint. And the rumors have not started to come out yet in terms of who that may be, but whoever it is, it's all about role refinement and figuring out ways to get better ball movement in general, and in some internal growth with some of those young guys and the maturity of both Embiid and Simmons as they work to try to build and fortify. I'll say this, kind of like almost my last point with Philly in general, next year is, and we're not anywhere near that yet, but I would think after next year, if you can keep both of those guys healthy, if it doesn't happen, that's when you set it on fire, like with one of those 2, with Embiid and Simmons. I think you have to give it one more year, try to get a coach. And I know, and other people would say, well, the coach has to come here and establish a system, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For me, I'd be like, listen, hey, coach, you got 1 year to make it work with these 2 dudes. Otherwise, one of them is going to go, and you can get a good haul for either one of them, one way or the other.
All right. So in that sense, I'm glad you actually kind of ended your point in that kind of way. What would be considered as a satisfactory season with a new head coach, a healthy Embiid and Simmons? How far do they go before, if you're Elton Brand, you decide that you want to blow, as our man Slick Partner would say, blow that ish up?
Well, you mentioned our guy, Slick Partner. I want to shout out our guy Matt D as well too. Those 2 really definitely have a lot to say, on our shows.
And they're very nice with the nuclear button, man. I have more confidence on him with the finger on the nuclear buttons than our current president. I'm just saying, man. They just
they ain't going
there. They ain't afraid.
But I think with Philly, it's about conference finals. I think at least that. I mean, I think you have to go somewhere that they haven't been yet. You know what I mean? So, they got to the semi.
They have never gone.
They got to the semifinals with the Kawhi bounce situation, and we're a game away or a bounce away from, potentially going to the conference finals then. So I think you have to go at least one round further than you haven't been yet before going to the semis. Getting bounced in the first round, definitely not it. Not making the playoffs, definitely not it. So yeah, for me, conference finals is the bare minimum that they'd have to reach in order to feel like they could continue to propel and grow on this thing.
Yeah, I agree with you that wholeheartedly. I think the fallback, the backup to that, if whoever the new head coach is, has one of these two guys elevate themselves to one of the NBA awards status level, right? Like Embiid has MVP, plays like an MVP, or
Simmons, defensive player of the year.
Defensive player of the year. If there's a way that you get those guys in that echelon in that first in his first year, in that first iteration of whoever the new head coach, he or she is the head coach. Thank you for correcting me on that. Whoever that is, I think that will extend the period, right? The cordial period of this, this duo of being, still being with the Philadelphia 76ers. But I agree with you. If either one of these things are not achieved, then you really have to consider the idea that you can no longer have Embiid and Simmons as a duo playing for the Philadelphia 76ers moving forward.
Yeah, again, like I said, so shouts to all our blow it up fans, so to speak, but with $147 million committed already, there's not a lot of flexibility that they have unless you are breaking up Embiid and Simmons. And I think Hal and I both agree that that's not what's going to happen immediately. But Elton Brand is a mover and a shaker. We didn't know he was going to get, Jimmy Butler when he did. We didn't know he was going to get Tobias Harris when he did. Does he really feel like, ultimately that's what it boils down to? And does he feel like he's on the hot seat, to really make something happen with ownership? So this offseason will be interesting for sure, as it always is. And my kind of like famous catchphrase or line, so to speak, is like, you just never know who else becomes available over the course of the offseason and the playoffs. Like some other team has a bad playoff loss, and now this guy wants to be out, and then maybe that is a better fit for your team. And, things start to change. But as we record today, in the middle of, trying to get to the semifinals of the NBA playoffs, I don't see a pathway where those two guys are not playing together next year.
All right. Well, there you have it. The Philadelphia 76ers, while a successful regular season above 500, was sixth seeded in the NBA Eastern Conference playoffs, whereas unceremoniously ousted in 4 games of the Boston Celtics. So many questions. Obviously, the removal of Brett Brown as the head coach is just the start of what's going to obviously be a very, very interesting offseason. We appreciate you guys for hopping on board with us as we give you our autopsy report, capturing, discussing, and getting insight on what we think may be going on with the 76ers. For the baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys for hopping on board with this. Be sure to stay with us throughout the NBA playoffs as we will continue to roll out our playoff edition autopsy report series. Also, our previews for the upcoming playoffs. We have the Celtics and the Raptors, which we've just recently done, so be sure to check that out. Be sure to catch us. We're all over, everywhere, all day, every day. We do it big. Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.